Bonjour à tous. On va commencer. Sanje chetan soki chonam la chanchu baratu dani Jin dagi jin sogi pesana ki rola penshir sanje rupai sho sanje chetan Chonam lai chanshu baratu dani kyapsu chin dagi jinso gi pesana Drola penchir sanje drupari shu sanje chetan soki chonam la Chanshu baratu dani kyapsu chin dagi jinso gi pesana ki Drola penshir sanje drupari shu samchen tamche Dewe jutan dempar jurji dunger tan dunger ki jutan jarwai jurji dunger me dewa tampa tam min jarwai jurji nyerin shadan tan Tan yun chenpo la ne par jurji par den save Lama Rinpoché Chi war pede den chula kadrin chenpe gone jesun te kusun tu ki ngedro tser tu sar Chom den de jampe yang la chat se lo kangi lo je jini tinje nam da rab serwe jinye den kun ji shin ji chi ni ki tu ka le ban jin Kanda si pe tsen rar maring men tun dung gizirwe Drotso kun la bu chi tar tse yen la ju chu yang den sun Drop tar chen dro nyen mon ni lon le ki chadro dre ze chi Marik men ser dunger nyugo jinye chadzer jina Dene dachin sa chu tar se yenten ludzo gyar se tu beku Chunra chudan chuni genche da le men ser jampe yang la du Tseden keki kenra bezergi Dalu timug men parab serne Katan tenche shunlu tokpai Lodje pope na wat ser tu ser
We're continuing our study of the Abhidharmakosha. We are looking at the second chapter, which discusses the governing faculties. We are working on the first main section of this chapter, which is entitled The Nature of the Governing Faculties. We began with the identification of each faculty, and now we have come to the second subsection, the establishment of the conclusion on the nature of the aspect of governing faculty. There are 4 subsections to this part. We have covered the first, which was the 6 classifications. This subsection was entitled A Complete Classification of Their Aspects. Now we're looking at the second subsection, which is the mode of acquisition. We looked at mode of acquisition in and of itself. In other words, this moment of birth, which is the first moment when consciousness in the bardo connects with a new existence. We saw how many faculties were present at this moment for each of the 3 realms, and we also looked at another point, which is the way that they cease. We saw how they cease in each of the 3 realms, and we saw how they cease in the desire realm, concerning a being that has been born due to appearance, as well as how beings who are born from the womb have their faculties cease. Now we come to a particular case, which is the case when one possesses a virtuous mind. We find this in stanza 16, line 2. And for the virtuous, regardless of their realm of existence, 5 additional cease. Here, when we say, and for the virtuous, when we're talking about the virtuous here, this refers to virtuous sovereign mind. Around a virtuous sovereign mind, we'll find the group of 5 faculties, whose first is confidence. As long as sovereign mind is virtuous, these 5 faculties are present. And thus, at the moment of death, regardless of the realm, if mind is virtuous, then these 5 faculties are present, and at the moment of death, they will also cease. They will be present in addition to the others that we looked at yesterday, and they will cease at the moment of death. This will allow us to look at how many faculties cease at the moment of death in each realm. Once again, we begin with the formless realm. We saw yesterday that at the moment of death in the formless realm, there are 3 faculties that cease at the same time. Life force faculty, mental faculty, and neutral sensation. These 3 governing faculties, at the moment of death in the formless realm, they cease at the same time. Concerning a virtuous mind at the moment of death, if a being of the formless realm possesses a virtue at this moment, then there will be 8 rather than 3 faculties that cease at this moment. The 3 that we mentioned before, life force faculty, mental faculty, and neutral sensation, and additionally the 5 virtuous faculties, in other words, the group of 5 whose first is confidence. If mind is virtuous at the moment of death in the formless realm, there are 8 governing faculties that cease at the same time. That concerns the formless realm. Next we come to the form realm. And we saw yesterday that in the form realm there are 8 faculties that cease at the same time at the moment of death. The 3 that we looked at in the formless realm, and additionally the 5 material faculties, which are in this case the 5 sense faculties. That makes 8 that cease at the same time at the moment of death. If a being of the form realm possesses a virtuous mind when it ceases, then in addition to these 8, we will also find the group of 5 whose first is confidence, which will also cease at this moment. So 8 plus 5, that makes 13 that will cease at the same time in this case. That was concerning the form realm. Next we come to the desire realm. We saw yesterday that at the moment of death there are various cases. The case with the maximum amount of faculties that cease at the same time is 10, 9, or 8 faculties. We saw that this concerns individuals who are born through appearance. If this person is in a state of virtue at the moment of death, then we find these 10, 9, or 8 that will cease, and we add the group of 5 whose first is confidence. In that case, there will be 13, 14, or 15 faculties that cease at the same time. Here, Khelzang Puntso didn't talk about the case of a being born from a womb, but we can easily extrapolate. The principle is the same. So now we have concluded the point on the mode of acquisition of the governing faculties. This part including how they arrive at the beginning of life and how they cease at the end of life. This concludes this point. Now we come to the third subsection of the point entitled Establishment of the Conclusion on the Nature of Governing Faculty. Sylvestre just concluded the second point, which was mode of acquisition. Now we come to the third, how many faculties to obtain the fruits. Now we will look at how the 4 fruits of noble beings are obtained. Before this, however, it's important to know what these 4 fruits of noble beings are. If we don't have these ideas, it's difficult to get into this subject. So before we begin this point and the root text, there is a long explanation concerning the 4 fruits of noble beings. There's a lot of information that's given. It'll be repeated in several different ways. It might seem fairly dense in the beginning, but little by little we come to understand. Khelzang Puntso begins by citing these 4 fruits. The first of the fruit of the noble beings is the one called stream enterer. The second fruit is a once returner. The third fruit is a non-returner. And the fourth fruit is the state of arhathood. Well, we will now analyze each of these four fruits. We'll begin with the first. Someone who has attained the fruit known as stream enterer is a noble being who has abandoned all there was to abandon on the path of seeing. They have arrived at the 16th moment, which is the beginning of the path of meditation. When a noble being, who is a stream enterer, is one who has abandoned all that is to be abandoned on the path of seeing, they arrive at the 16th moment, which is the beginning of the path of meditation. Concerning what is to be abandoned, we talk about what is to be abandoned by the path of seeing and what is to be abandoned by the path of meditation. There are things that are to be abandoned by the path of seeing that are related to the desire realm, and things to be abandoned by the path of seeing that are related to the form and formless realms. In this case, we're talking about the path of seeing. The same is true for the path of meditation. There are things to be abandoned by the path of meditation in relation to the desire realm, and others that are related to the form and formless realm. A being who reaches the 16th moment of the path of seeing has abandoned all there was to abandon by the path of seeing concerning the three realms. This person has not yet abandoned what is to be abandoned by the path of meditation. They will do so when they attain the following fruits, the three subsequent fruits. What is to be abandoned by the path of meditation is threefold. What is related to the desire realm, related to the form realm, and related to the formless realm. Concerning what is to be abandoned in relation to the desire realm, there is a cycle of 9 things, 3 times 3. We talk about 9 nuances of things to abandon, and there will be combinations between strong, medium, and weak. On the path of meditation, we first abandon the coarsest emotions, the ones that are said to be strong, then the strong medium, and then the strong weak. Then we abandon the medium strong, then the medium medium, and then the medium weak. And lastly, you may have guessed, we abandon the weak strong, the weak medium, and the most subtle, the weak weak. And that makes 9. A being who has attained the fruit of stream enterer has abandoned all there was to abandon on the path of seeing. Then they will begin to eliminate the things that are to be abandoned by the path of meditation. Let's repeat. A being who has attained the fruit of stream enterer has abandoned all there was to abandon on the path of seeing. Then they will begin eliminating things that are to be abandoned by the path of meditation. Someone who is a stream enterer will begin to abandon what is to be abandoned by the path of meditation. When they arrive on the path of meditation, they will begin by abandoning things that are strong, strong, etc. We saw that there are 9 nuances. When this person reaches the 6th nuance, which is medium weak, they attain the fruit of a once returner. Once in relation to what is to be abandoned, in relation to what is to be abandoned in relation to the desire realm. So there are still the 7th, 8th, and 9 nuances of things to be abandoned. And for this being will take birth, be reborn one more time in the desire realm. In this individual's subsequent existence, when they have abandoned these 3 further nuances, they attain the fruit called a non-returner. They have attained this. As we said, they return to the desire realm one time. They abandon the 3 weak nuances, and then they attain the state of a non-returner. What this means is that all that is to be abandoned in relation to the desire realm has been abandoned. There are no further attachments or connections to the desire realm, and this is why we call them a non-returner. In order to obtain the state of a once returner, it is necessary to attain the 6th stage. For the state of, or the fruit of a non-returner, one must attain the 9th stage. So now we may have questions. What happens between stages 1 and 5, and between stages 6 and 8? For example, at stage 1, a person is a stream enterer. This being has begun the path of meditation. So long as they have not attained the 6th stage, while they are on stages 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they still possess this fruit stream enterer, even if they're at the 5th stage. But once they reach the 6th stage, they have attained the fruit of once returner. The same is true for the other two fruits, a once returner and a non-returner. In other words, if we attain the 8th stage, this means that we are still endowed with the fruit of a once returner. So long as we have not attained the 9th stage, we have not attained the fruit of a non-returner. There are 9 nuances of things to be abandoned by the path of meditation in the desire realm, and there are also 9 nuances of things to be abandoned for each of the levels up to the peak of existence. In the first meditative absorption of the form realm, there are also 9 nuances of things to be abandoned. Likewise for the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th meditative absorptions. Next, we come to the formless realm. Likewise, there are 9 nuances of things to be abandoned for each of the levels. Each of these levels, let's name them. There is the sphere of infinite space. The 2nd level, the sphere of infinite consciousness, then the sphere of nothingness, and lastly, the peak of existence. Nevertheless, from the 9th stage of the desire realm, the moment when one has obtained the 3rd fruit, all the way up to the 8th nuance of the peak of existence, one possesses the 3rd fruit, the fruit of a non-returner. The fruit of a non-returner is present from obtaining the 9th stage in relation to the desire realm, all the way through obtaining the 8th stage in relation to the peak of existence. Then, when we reach the 9th stage, and more particularly when we eliminate the 9th nuance, this is obtaining the 4th fruit, the state of arhathood. That was a general presentation of the 4 fruits. Now we will look at an explanation of the terms progressive fruit and bounding or leaping fruit. So we are in our study of the four fruits, and we will more particularly look at the two intermediate fruits, a once-returner and a non-returner. Each of these fruits can be divided into two. Concerning a once-returner, we can find a progressive fruit of a once-returner and a bounding fruit of a once-returner. The same is true for the fruit of a non-returner. There is a progressive fruit of non-returner and a bounding fruit of non-returner. And now we'll have a definition. Progressive means that before obtaining a certain fruit, we must necessarily have obtained the previous fruit. Take a deep breath. I've never spoken so slowly. So let's go over the definition again. Progressive means that before obtaining a certain fruit, one must necessarily have obtained the previous fruit. If we consider the progressive fruit of a once-returner, this means that it must be preceded by the first fruit, the fruit of a stream enterer. Likewise, for the progressive fruit of a non-returner. When we say that this fruit of a non-returner is progressive, this means that we have attained or gone through the fruit of a stream enterer and then a once-returner. And now, in order to understand the term bounding fruit, we'll look at another notion, which is that of worldly meditative absorption and superworldly meditative absorption. Before we go further, it's important to clarify that there are several meditative absorptions. One of them is called the preparatory stage of the first meditative absorption. This preparatory stage of the first meditative absorption may be of two types. It can be either associated with factors for descent, in other words, worldly, or dissociated from factors for descent, in other words, superworldly. During this preparatory stage of the first meditative absorption, we will concentrate on two aspects: the flaws of our own level and on the qualities of the superior level, or the level above. In order to attain the vision of the Four Noble Truths, in other words, the path of seeing, it is necessary, it is required to rely on meditative absorption. In this case, the preparatory stage of the first meditative absorption. During this preparatory stage, a practitioner engages in the meditation of calm abiding. Once this is established, when the practitioner is engaged in calm abiding meditation, they will concentrate on the Four Noble Truths. On this basis, at a certain point, they will attain the path of seeing. On the path of seeing, there are 16 moments. In order to reach the path of seeing, one necessarily requires the support of a meditative absorption. Once one has obtained this meditative absorption, then it is possible to truly meditate on the Four Noble Truths and attain the path of seeing. As was said, the path of seeing includes or is made up of 16 moments. From the first to the 15th moment, this is the path of seeing. The 16th moment becomes the path of meditation. Once one has obtained the 16th moment, we enter the path of meditation and obtain the fruit of a stream enterer. Then the practitioner will deepen their practice and abandon what is to be abandoned by the path of meditation. And they will progressively go from the stage 1 to stages 2, 3, 4, and 5. Once they have reached the 6th stage, they obtain the fruit of a once returner. This is the progressive case. So then what happens in a bounding case? It was said that certain fruits are bounding. What does this mean? When an ordinary practitioner begins with a worldly path and concludes with a supraworldly path. In other words, by focusing on the Four Noble Truths. Based on worldly meditation, in other words, one that is associated with factors for descent, this being, who is not yet a noble being, will go to the 6th stage, will abandon the nuances up to the 6th stage, and at this point they will meditate on the Four Noble Truths. In the case of a progressive fruit, we saw that once the 16th moment was obtained, one enters the path of meditation and obtains the fruit of a stream enterer. That's not the case here. Due to having previously eliminated what is to be abandoned up through the 6th stage, once one has attained the 16th moment, one does not obtain the fruit of a stream enterer. Rather, one bounds directly to the fruit of a once returner. In this case, there is no progression. In other words, it's not necessary to have previously obtained the fruit of a stream enterer. A practitioner begins by abandoning what is to be abandoned by the path of meditation. Abandons this all the way up to the 6th stage, abandons what is to be abandoned on stages 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and at the 6th stage, they turn towards the Four Noble Truths. At this moment, they obtain the different moments of the path of seeing. And when they reach the 16th moment, instead of obtaining the fruit of a stream enterer, they bound directly to the fruit of a once returner. This will get clearer as we go along. We'll repeat it several times with different elements being added. Based on worldly meditation, we can reach the 6th stage of things to be abandoned by the path of meditation, while still being an ordinary being. Things to be abandoned on the path of meditation in relation to the desire realm. Once we have reached the 6th stage, we begin to practice and we accomplish the paths of accumulation and junction, and we reach the path of seeing. From the 1st to the 15th moment, this is the path of seeing. Once the 16th moment is obtained, it is the path of meditation. We might have said that it would be logical to attain the fruit of stream enterer, as occurs in the progressive path, but in the case of abounding fruit, due to having eliminated what is to be abandoned all the way up to the 6th nuance, we bound directly to the fruit of a once returner without going through the fruit of a stream enterer. Let's take a few breaths. So let's keep going. Here, there's actually a short recap. We'll go over the fruit of a once returner. That's a progressive one and a bounding one. Somebody's asking a question without a microphone. Can you please repeat the names of the 4 fruits of the noble ones? The first fruit is a stream enterer. The second fruit is a once returner. The third fruit is a non-returner. And the fourth fruit is the state of arhathood. We're currently talking about the 2 intermediate fruits, which are the 2 that are said to be either progressive or bounding. We looked at the progressive once returner fruit, where a practitioner begins by meditating on the 4 noble truths at the beginning of their path. They accomplish the 15 moments of the path of seeing and reach the 16th moment, in other words, the beginning of the path of meditation. Once they have reached this 16th moment, progressively, having gone through the first, second, etc. stages, all the way up to the 6th stage, they attain the fruit of a once returner. So that's the progressive case. And now we'll look at the bounding once returner fruit, without even meditating on the Four Noble Truths, by way of a worldly path, this practitioner will reach the sixth nuance. At this stage, they have not obtained any fruit. They have not obtained the fruit of a once returner. At this point, having reached the sixth stage, the practitioner decides to meditate on the Four Noble Truths, and then accomplishes the 15 moments of the path of seeing and reaches the 16th moment, which corresponds to the path of meditation. And at this point, instead of going progressively and redoing stages 1 through 6, they will directly bound to the 6th stage, and thus to the fruit of a once returner, which is in this case said to be bounding. We'll go over it again. In the progressive case, we begin with the path of seeing. We reach the path of meditation and progressively eliminate what is to be eliminated on the path of meditation. In this progressive case, we begin with a supra-worldly path. In the progressive case, we begin by meditating on the supra-worldly path with a supra-worldly meditation, a meditation that is beyond the world. For the bounding case, the opposite is true. We begin with a worldly path. We reach the 6th stage, and then we meditate on the Four Noble Truths. We attain the path of seeing. In other words, we accomplish the 15 moments and reach the path of meditation. At this point, due to having previously cultivated the different stages up to stage 6, we bound directly to the once returner fruit, in this case said to be bounding. So I'll just conclude this paragraph and then we'll spend the rest of our time on questions. When we talk about a worldly path, in other words, a path that is associated with factors for descent, at this point we are an ordinary being. It is a path that is associated with factors for descent. Nevertheless, based on this worldly path of meditation, we are capable of eliminating the things that are to be abandoned by the path of meditation. What is to be abandoned by the path of meditation can either be abandoned by a worldly path or by a supra-worldly path, a path that is beyond the world. Based on a worldly path, while still being an ordinary being, with practice or By way of practicing, we are capable of eliminating what is to be abandoned by the path of meditation. We can also do this with a superworldly path. We meditate on the Four Noble Truths. We reach the path of seeing. In other words, we accomplish the 15 moments, and at the 16th moment, we can continue with a superworldly path to eliminate what is to be abandoned by the path of meditation. The question is what we just said progressive? Yes. Yes, it is. And so now we can take some time for questions. Are we still on the path of stanza 16? The path of stanza 16, let's see. In fact, we are looking at the point that is a long introduction. And in fact, we're not done with the introduction. We are partway through a long introduction on the fruit of noble beings. Because in the explanations of the 22 governing faculties, the point that we are working up to, that we haven't yet started, is how many faculties to obtain the fruits. How many faculties out of the 22 are necessary in order to obtain the fruits. At this point in the teaching, Khelzang Puntso, who taught us the Abhidharmakosha, he could have directly gone into which governing faculties are necessary to obtain which fruits, but he gave an introduction about the four fruits in order to help us understand the relationship between the 22 faculties and the fruits. This is why we have this whole introduction to the fruits, for some of them in their progressive or bounding aspects. So this is an introduction that Khelzang Puntso gave, and all of this information that we see here in a very short format is covered in much more detail in chapter 6, which goes into detail on all of the paths. There will be many more details given on the paths. Nevertheless, this introduction is great because it's short, it's not very wordy, and it gives a lot of information. And so now, with the questions here, we will try to clarify the information that we've just received. I have a question about the instants. It's a bit mysterious. Is this a length of time? Is it some kind of mechanism? What happens during these instants? I'm guessing you're talking about these 16 moments, the 15th, the 16th, all of that. These 16 moments are what we call the 16 moments of the path of seeing. Here, in this chapter, we have talked about things to be abandoned on the path of seeing, which implicitly talks about the path of seeing. We also talked about things to be abandoned on the path of meditation, which talks about the path of meditation. For the moment, we've mainly focused on these two paths. We haven't really focused on the other ones. The path of seeing occurs over the course of 16 moments. We talk about the 16 moments of the path of seeing, over the course of which all of the things which are to be abandoned on the path of seeing are abandoned. Over the course of these 16 moments, all the things that are to be abandoned by the path of seeing will be abandoned. This path is the difference between an ordinary being and a noble being. When we reach the 16th moment of the path of seeing, in the progressive case, we reach the fruit of a stream enterer, or in the bounding case, we reach the fruit of a once returner or a non-returner. In any case, the path of seeing is what is the difference between an ordinary being and a noble being. What's bugging me is this term, instant. It sounds instantaneous. Up to this point, there have not been any explanations given about the term instant as it relates to the instant or moments related to the moments of the path of seeing. Nevertheless, what I can say is that the path of seeing is short. It doesn't last a long time. It's not a path that will last for lifetimes and lifetimes. It's a path that is quite short. There are differences depending on practitioners, but several times Khelzang Puntso said that the path of seeing, it can occur within one meditation session. It's a path that can be relatively short. A meditation session that can depend on practitioners, could be longer or shorter. There can be a variability in terms of the time. Nevertheless, this path doesn't take very long. It's one of the shortest paths. That's something that Khelzang Puntso said on multiple occasions. So I feel all right sharing that with you here, even though it wasn't said specifically here. In any case, when we talk about moments, we're talking about time, and this path is relatively short. And it's a path where there are things to be abandoned. On the path of seeing and on the path of meditation, we find 3 times 3 things to be abandoned in relation to the desire realm, and then 3 times 3 nuances of things to be abandoned in relation to the first level of the form realm, and so on and so forth for each of the different levels. We can see that in relation to this, the path of meditation is much longer. I think you may have just answered part of my question, but in any case, concerning the path of meditation and the progressive fruit, if I understood correctly, it is accessible to an ordinary being based on a worldly aspect, an aspect that is associated with factors for descent. So concerning the progressive fruit, we talk about an ordinary being, but then for the bounding fruit, it seems that it's accessible to a noble being. It's the opposite, actually. An ordinary being will begin the path of meditation while still being an ordinary being. They engage in the path of meditation. They will focus on the flaws of their own level and on the qualities of the higher levels. In this way, they will progressively abandon the nuances from stage 1 to 6 as an ordinary being, and then in the 6th stage they decide to focus on the 4 truths of the Noble Ones, and here they bound, meaning that when they complete the path of seeing, when they reach the path of meditation, they won't be at the 1st stage, they will be at the 6th stage, and thus this practitioner will not attain the stream enterer fruit when they reach the path of meditation, but rather the once returner fruit. Whereas in the progressive case, one will begin directly with the path of seeing. We don't begin the path of meditation before engaging upon the path of seeing. In order to reach the path of seeing, one needs to have at least accomplished the preparatory stage of the first meditative absorption. And here, when we focus on the 4 Noble Truths, this is meditative absorption that is dissociated from factors for descent. When we're an ordinary being, this meditation is associated with factors for descent. In the case of a progressive practitioner, the meditation is supraworldly, dissociated from factors for descent. I think the answers that were given answer my question. I read that there are 9 stages of Shine in a certain book. Is there a link between what you're saying and these 9 stages of Shine? That's the first aspect. And then in Nagarjuna's letter to a friend, in the final pages, there are some tables concerning the paths, etc. Is it useful to go and check out these tables? Okay, 2 questions. The first is, are the 9 stages of Shine parallel to the 9 nuances of things to abandon on a path? The 9 stages of Shine are explained in various texts, and this explains the progression of practice. The 9 nuances of things to abandon focuses primarily on afflictive obscurations which are to be abandoned. We're talking about things to abandon, thus afflictive obscurations. There is no correlation between these two. The 9 nuances of things to abandon, I can take, let's look at an example of a meditative absorption that is not dissociated from factors for descent, just someone who practices meditation and will obtain a meditative absorption by way of various practices. One can obtain meditative absorption. When someone obtains meditative absorption, they will be able to abandon these various nuances of things to abandon by the path of meditation in relation to the desire realm. And so such a person, by way of their meditative absorption, can begin to abandon these things which are to be abandoned by the path of meditation. Someone who's not necessarily Buddhist, in this way, they need to have attained meditative absorption. In order to attain meditative absorption, one needs to have previously accomplished the 9 stages of Shine. So we can see that these things come together at a certain point, but they're not parallel. Concerning the letter to a friend, it's important to know that here, in the context of the Abhidharmakosha, the paths are described from a Theravada viewpoint, which is not necessarily the same viewpoint as the Mahayana. The 5 paths, as they are explained, by the Vaibhashika can differ from the 5 paths as they are explained by Nagarjuna from the perspective of the great vehicle, from the perspective of a bodhisattva. The explanations are not quite the same. There are 5 paths in the Mahayana and also 5 paths concerning the Shravakayana. We will find certain similarities, but we can't look at one and say, okay, I've read the 5 paths as they're explained in the Great Vehicle, and thus it's the same here in the Abhidharmakosha. Here we are studying the 5 paths and the 4 fruits, and in the Mahayana it's explained differently. We might find some common points, but there really are 2 subjects of study that it's important not to mix. There are distinctions between them. I didn't understand very well how the different realms work out, the desire realm, the form realm, the formless realm. When we have abandoned the 9 nuances of the desire realm, then we reach the form realm and we abandon we necessarily have to go through the 3 realms. First, I need to clarify your question. Is your question concerning going over the order of each of the nuances for each of the realms, or are you trying to understand if we have to necessarily be in the realm in question in order to abandon the nuances? To reach the state of arhathood, questioner is asking this, do we have to go through the 9 nuances? We have to go from realm to realm? Or can we... sorry, it's a little hard because I don't have all the details. Okay, but when you say go through the realms, you're asking if we need to be born there. Yes, that's my question. In order to attain the state of arhathood, it is necessary to have abandon all of the nuances relative to each of the levels. So those relative to the desire realm, those relative to the form realm. Well, in any case, it's 9 times 9 nuances. We have to have abandoned all of these nuances. That said, with the body of the desire realm, it is possible to attain these meditative absorptions. At the time of the Buddha, there were beings who attained the state of arhathood in a human body. They were capable of accomplishing these meditative absorptions, abandoning what was to be abandoned, with a human body. I thought I heard in other teachings that it's important not to stay in the meditations of the formless realm, that you get stuck there. These instructions that we hear, where the instruction is not to go into these types of meditative absorptions, are instructions relative to the great vehicle. These instructions are notably present in relation to the practice system of Mahamudra. There is advice for practitioners to avoid engaging completely in these meditative absorptions. Here, we don't find this instruction because here the path that is practiced is a path of abandonment. The path that is explained in terms of the 4 fruits in the Abhidharmakosha is a path where we will abandon things. We will abandon things by way of the path of seeing over the course of the 16 moments. And then we will abandon things on the path of meditation, the 9 nuances for the desire realm, and all of the others makes 81 in total. We abandon all of this on the path of meditation. What is important to know is that in order to enter one path or another, we need to have obtained a meditative absorption. Someone who wishes to accomplish the path of seeing cannot accomplish or enter the path of seeing without a meditative absorption, as it's explained in the Abhidharmakosha. This is why we talk about first accomplishing meditative absorption. But out of the great multitude of meditative absorptions, the one that's given as an example here is the preparatory stage of the first meditative absorption. That's its name. And in order to obtain this meditative absorption, it is not necessary to be a noble being. We could say that one is at the beginning of the path. Nevertheless, in order to obtain meditative absorption, the practitioner is quite formidable. In any case, practitioners at this point are capable of beginning the path of meditation, the path of seeing, or the path of meditation. If they focus on the 4 noble truths, they will go through the various moments and abandon what is to be abandoned on the path of seeing. If one does not focus on the 4 noble truths, they will begin abandoning things by considering the flaws of their own level. Humans, for example, will see the suffering associated with the desire realm, and they will focus on the first meditative absorption. Having heard instructions on this, they will consider the qualities of this meditative absorption, and at a certain point, they will abandon. This meditative absorption is what allows them to abandon the nuances of their own level and obtain the superior stage, the stage above. If one does it in a worldly way, they truly see the flaws and abandon them, and then they obtain the meditative absorption above. And thus, one can rise or reach the path, the peak of existence. Often in the teachings, when it's said, the goal is not to get stuck or go to these meditative absorptions. The important point is to understand that going through these various meditative absorptions is not what leads to liberation. Here, the understanding is that when we accomplish the path of seeing, we go through these various moments, we abandon what is to be abandoned, and this is the moment when one becomes a noble being. So here the instructions are given in a slightly different context, which is nevertheless a Buddhist context. Pardon me, but I'm coming back to the 9 aspects of Shine. I think it's in Moonbeams. I guess my job is to work on that. That's what Lama Jigmé Rinpoché said this morning. I think we're all at that point. We try to practice. We try to practice Shine. We try to carry out our meditation practice, to learn about this proposition that the Buddha made concerning the paths, about phenomena that are inner phenomena like knowledge, or outer phenomena like physical phenomena. In this point that we're looking at, we're learning about the 22 governing faculties, and alongside this we receive instructions on the practice of Chenrezi. We try to apply it, and we carry out effort. We make effort on these three fronts, and if, based on our practice, we are able to obtain stability or to truly establish the practice of Shine, then these things that are described, such as the path of seeing, are things that can really happen. In any case, that's what I wish for all of us here. And yes, indeed, there is a lot of meditation practice that is necessary. I'm not sure if I'll be able to ask a clear question. I can see that I'm mixing things up between the fruits, the realms, and the paths. In any case, you said that there were these 9 things to abandon, and when we reach the 6th, we obtain the first fruit, but then it was said that these 9 things are to be abandoned for each of the realms. We reach this fruit of a non-returner when at what moment? It's all a little muddled. The first 3 fruits are attained in the desire realm. Once we have attained the 3rd fruit of a non-returner, then we have no more connections to the desire realm. Concerning confusion between the paths, the fruits, and the realms. In the desire realm, we find the first 3 fruits. The path of seeing also occurs there, as well as the beginning of the path of meditation. The first 9 nuances. The first 9 nuances are those of the desire realm. Once we have abandoned them, we attain the fruit of a non-returner. And from this point on, all the way until the state of arhathood, we need to abandon all of the nuances for each meditative absorption and each level of the formless realm. Thus, 8 times 9 things to be abandoned remain. Earlier, I noted, 9 after we've gotten rid of 8. When we manage to eliminate the first 6, this is the fruit of a once returner. When we eliminate the first 9, then that's the fruit of a non-returner. And this occurs in the desire realm? Yes. And then from there on, it continues. Yes. There are different paths. Here we've focused on the path of seeing and the path of meditation. All throughout these paths, both the path of seeing and the path of meditation, we abandon things relative to that path, and there are also things for that path that are associated with the desire realm, and things that are associated with the form and formless realms. So there is a list of things to abandon in relation to the desire realm, and there are things to abandon in relation to the form and formless realm. Over the course of these abandonments, we will obtain the fruits. The fruits appear over the course of the paths. We saw that for the two middle fruits, not the first and not the last, not stream enterer nor the state of arhathood, but for those two that are in the middle, they can be obtained in a progressive way or in a bounding way. These two can be obtained in two different ways. Just to clarify concerning what I said earlier, the first three fruits are in the desire realm, but what Sylvestre said is more accurate. The first three fruits are relative to the desire realm. Because we said that from the desire realm, we can eliminate things relative to the form and the formless realm. So. To try and connect the dots between several aspects of what has been said, and to try and test my understanding and clarify something, it seems that there are two aspects described in these paths: an aspect of purification and an aspect of knowledge. Abandoning what is to be abandoned and concentrating on the Four Noble Truths is what determines if we first purify and then attain the path of seeing, thus enter a superworldly path, or if we'll do it the other way, we will first have an aspect of knowledge. We will meditate on the Four Noble Truths and obtain the path of seeing. In this case, we will immediately be on a superworldly path. And this is why in one case we bound and in another case we don't. We bound if we have purified by beginning to eliminate what is to be eliminated. But it's a worldly path because we have not realized the Four Truths of the Noble Ones, because we haven't accomplished the path of seeing. Whereas in the other case, we focus on the aspect of knowledge first, the path of seeing. And we begin directly with a superworldly path in terms of a noble being. Is the way that I've expressed this coherent with what you've said? Yes. If, when you speak of purification, we associate the word that you're using with things to be abandoned on the path of meditation. If the aspect of knowledge that you're talking about corresponds to things to abandon on the path of seeing, that works. But then in chapter 6, when we go into detail on the paths, we'll see how each of these 16 moments of the path of seeing are organized. We'll see that there are things that are abandoned that are relative to the desire realm, things that are abandoned relative to the two higher realms, and we'll also see the progression of these moments and further elements concerning this path. Your understanding seems to fit with what's said here. I'm sorry for those who weren't able to ask their questions. We are out of time. It's 4:35. Let's dedicate. Sanam di tamche sepani tamye nipe chanam pamchene
Yengan nachi palam chompa yi simpin sole chawa tawara sho.